My most recent book is called The Taste of Ashes, The Afterlife of Totalitarianism in Eastern Europe. And it's a book literally about the afterlife of the communist and Nazi experiences in Eastern Europe, to some extent about the lingering of the past in the present and the certain darker side of the fall of communism. Yes, well, I first went to former communist Europe in 1993, and I was very caught up in the romance of 1989, and in particular the romance of the Velvet Revolution, the imprisoned playwright and human rights activist who becomes the president of a liberated country and goes to live in a beautiful castle. And of course, what I discovered when I came to Eastern Europe was that this idea that the Wicked Witch was dead and censorship was lifted and now everybody would bask in the light of truth and live happily ever after, that alas was in fact not the way things were going to be. And I had this idea certainly that once you have freedom of speech and once you open the archives, once everybody learns the truth. I mean, Havel's great slogan was the truth will prevail, the moral imperative to live in truth. And the idea was that the truth was going to be liberating and the truth was going to be beautiful and people would live happily ever after. And 1990s was certainly, it was incredibly seductive and intriguing time to be a historian, an aspiring historian as I was in Eastern Europe. The archives were just opening and there was a kind of voyeuristic thrill of getting to see things that had been under lock and key, in some cases things people had never seen before. But what I came to realize that there was going to be no basking in the light of truth as such, that in fact the communist archives were more or less like the Freudian unconscious. For Freud, the unconscious was a kind of dark psychic closet in which everything too disturbing for the conscious mind was thrown. And the Communist Party archives were essentially that dark psychic closet in which everything too disturbing for the conscious mind was thrown. And what Freud understood was that when you start coaxing the contents of that dark psychic closet into consciousness, that he understood it was going to be painful. It was certainly not going to be nice, and it was not going to be a kind of happily ever after story in which you bask in the light of truth. It was going to be an agonizing process of grappling with that truth. And historians should certainly tell all different kinds of stories. And as any individual historian, we only have a chance in our lifetimes to choose a small handful of those stories that we're going to tell. And every once in a while you find a story that does seem to have a happy ending. The 20th century Eastern Europe was really not about happy endings. 20th century Eastern Europe was unfortunately really quite dark. But how we choose our stories, I think that's an extremely personal question, because we're all drawn to certain stories for idiosyncratic reasons. This idea of empathy, I was drawing on the German philosopher Wilhelm Dilthey's notion of understanding, of verstehen in a very large sense, which he says is achieved first and foremost by a kind of nacherleben, a kind of vicariously reliving or re-experiencing along with these characters from the past. And for me, that understanding, which is absolutely the first and the foremost task and goal of the historian. Our job is to understand. Our job first and foremost is to understand, and that really involves a kind of recreation and re-experiencing of the lives of other people, and it necessitates a kind of empathy. And that empathy is not innocent. It comes with a risk of moral relativism, and it is an empathy that is only ever achieved through voyeurism. We read things that were never meant for us to see. We read people's diaries. We read letters that were written to other people. We read secret police files that should never have been gathered.